This story was submitted online by a female in her 20s. The location is an unnamed temple in Saga Prefecture. In the quiet countryside of Saga Prefecture, Kyushu, where I live, there's a well-known temple famous for its breathtaking azaleas in spring and brilliant maple leaves in autumn. It's the kind of place locals are quietly proud of, tucked away in nature and far from the bustle of city life. This happened in late November. At the time I was a university student with way too much free time on my hands. So one afternoon I decided to go out on a solo trip to enjoy the autumn colors at that temple. I parked my car in a paid lot a short distance from the entrance. From there, a gentle sloping road led uphill towards the temple grounds. Along the roadside, many local residents had set up simple stalls in front of their homes, selling homemade manju, sweet buns, fresh vegetables from their gardens, and hand-carved wooden crafts. It felt peaceful and nostalgic, like one of those timeless rural scenes that almost makes you forget what year it is. After walking for about 10 more minutes, I reached the base of the temple's main staircase, a long steep set of stones stretching up into the mountain. Both sides of the staircase were lined edge to edge with azalea bushes. They weren't blooming in November, but I could imagine how spectacular the view must be in spring when they explode into color. There was a sign pointing to a side path for a gentler route up the hill. But since this was my first visit, I thought I'd do things properly and climb the stairs from the front. Halfway up the staircase, I passed an old man carefully ascending, one step at a time, gripping the handrail for balance. "You young people really do have it easy," he chuckled, smiling kindly as I passed him. I smiled back, pretending I wasn't already breathless. Truth be told, I was struggling. My lack of exercise was catching up to me fast. It was around this point, somewhere in the middle of the staircase, that I noticed something odd. A pale blue handkerchief lying on one of the upper steps. It was dainty and elegant, with lace along the edges, the kind of thing you'd expect a well-dressed older woman with a parasol to carry. I bent down and picked it up. If I leave it here, someone might step on it, I thought. I'll bring it to the shrine office later. Without thinking much of it, I folded the handkerchief neatly and tucked it into my coat pocket and continued up the steps. I had climbed about 20 more steps when it happened. Despite the clear skies and the warm sun shining down on me, I was suddenly overwhelmed by a deep chill, a cold that seemed to grip me from the inside out. Maybe the air is cooler up here, I thought naively. But then the cold didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. My hands started shaking. My fingertips trembled violently. I began to feel like I couldn't breathe. No matter how hard I tried to suck in air, it felt like my lungs weren't responding. My chest tightened like it was being squeezed in a vice. It reminded me painfully of the asthma attacks I had as a child. That terrifying feeling of slowly drowning in plain air. Panic set in. Terrified I'd fall backward and roll down the stone steps, I dropped to my knees and braced myself against the cold stone. But it didn't help. My symptoms kept worsening. My teeth were chattering so hard I could hear the clacking echo inside my head. Then my vision began to fade. A fuzzy darkness crept in from the edges of my sight. I thought, I'm gonna pass out, right here on the stairs. And then,
"I finally caught up to you,"
came a cheerful voice from behind. Instantly, like a switch had been flipped, the suffocating pressure in my chest vanished. My lungs filled with air. I gasped and I looked up. It was the old man from earlier, the one I had passed by on the steps. He was breathing heavily, a friendly smile on his face. Somehow the freezing cold I had just felt moments ago was gone, without a trace. What the hell just happened? Still shaking, I continued up the stairs, passing the first signs of autumn foliage. I tried to shake off what had happened. Maybe it was just a panic attack. And I stretched my arms high above my head as I walked, trying to feel normal again. Eventually I reached the main hall of the temple. I stood in front of the offering box, pulled out my wallet from my coat pocket, and along with it, out dropped the handkerchief I picked up earlier. I crouched to retrieve it. and I noticed something strange. The handkerchief wasn't flat. It was lumpy, like something had been folded inside. Curious, I began to unfold it, and tiny white pieces spilled out like dry petals on the wind. Startled, I crouched lower to examine them. They were fingernail clippings, human nail clippings, curved and jagged, like the ones you'd trim off with a nail clipper. Ugh, what the hell? Disgusted, I picked up the handkerchief again, and that's when I saw it. Inside, wrapped carefully, was what looked like a damp, partially dried umbilical cord. A wave of nausea rolled through me. My skin broke out in a cold sweat. My fingers tingled. All I knew in that moment was that I had to get rid of it, immediately. I clumsily refolded the handkerchief to hide the umbilical cord and placed it on the edge of the offering box, and I fled. I didn't even finish my prayer. There was no way I was going back down those stairs, so I took the detour path instead. A steep slope that twisted down the mountainside. It was long and tiring, but I took it slow, stopping to rest as needed. Eventually I made it back down to the bottom, and as I turned to glance back at the path I had just come from, I noticed someone standing about 15 meters away, half hidden in the shadow of a house. It was a woman, thin, wearing a long skirt that reached down to her ankles. I couldn't tell her age. Her face was young, but somehow not. Her presence felt wrong. Even from that distance, her eyes stood out, huge and round, with a strange intensity that pierced right through me. And the second I met her gaze, I knew. That was her, the one who owned the handkerchief. I don't know how I knew, I just did. Was she trying to curse someone? Well, I didn't want to find out. I turned and jogged towards my car, the woman's eyes burning into the back of my head the whole way. She didn't move an inch, she just stood there, her massive eyes boring into me like she was drilling a hole straight through my spine. That night, after I got home, I was checking my coat pockets before throwing it in the laundry, and I found a few nail clippings still inside. They must have slipped out of the handkerchief and stayed there unnoticed, and then I had the terrifying thought, wait, was I the target of the curse? I couldn't think of why anybody would want to wish harm on me. I don't have any enemies, I've not been through any recent drama, but the second I saw those nail clippings again, that icy dread returned. I knew I couldn't just throw them in the trash, not in my house. The idea made my skin crawl. So I walked over to the river near my home and I threw them in, watching them vanish into the dark current. That's everything that happened that day, but I still wonder, who was that woman? And why was she staring at me like that? And that handkerchief? The nail clippings, the damp umbilical cord? Was it some kind of cursed object? And if it was, what happens to someone who picks it up? So far, nothing unusual has happened, but every time I remember those wide, glaring eyes, a shiver creeps down my spine. Hi, Jay here. Sorry to cut in, but I've seen that nearly half of my viewers aren't subscribed. So please, if you like the stories I've translated from Japan, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more. And of course, the next viewer's suggestion video. Your suggestion might make it. Thanks. This story was told to me by a relative. Aiko, not her real name, was a woman in her early 40s, a single mother. Her husband passed away when their son was still in elementary school, and ever since, she's had to raise him on her own. The boy had been cheerful and outgoing as a child, but somewhere around middle school, things started to unravel. Health issues, pressure over future plans, and the onset of adolescence all collided, and it took a toll on his mental health. He became rebellious, even violent towards Aiko, and eventually stopped going to school altogether. Aiko was already under incredible stress, grieving for her husband, living with the fear and anxiety that comes with raising a child alone, and on top of that, dealing with domestic violence from her own son. And yet, despite everything, She'd been appointed as a class representative in her son's second year of middle school, a role that gave her no space to mentally recover or catch her breath. By the time her son reached third year, he had completely withdrawn from school. Still, Aiko continued to fulfill her responsibilities as class rep, attending meetings and planning events. Aiko was known among the PTA for being responsible and easy to talk to. She wasn't just competent, she stood out. Through her work as a rep, she gradually formed bonds with other members. The one she grew closest to was the head of the committee, a woman named B. B was about 5 years older than Aiko, and also came from a troubled family background, which naturally created a sense of camaraderie between them. B had a soft, low-paced demeanor. She was good at listening, really listening. Even though she had a bit of an odd personality, her warmth and patience made Aiko feel safe in a way that she seldom experienced. Aiko, who was usually cautious around others, came to trust B more than anyone. She told B everything, how she felt lonely after her husband died, how painful it was to be screamed and hit by the very child she'd raised with so much love and effort. Most of the other mums in the PTA had quote-unquote normal families. Aiko couldn't bring herself to talk about her situation around them. She felt ashamed somehow. But B had also been through divorce. She also was raising a child on her own. And so Aiko felt she could confide in her without judgment. They would meet to vent, talk, or just enjoy each other's company. B became her emotional support. Even after Aiko's son graduated middle school and began attending a correspondence-based high school, their friendship continued. They'd go out for lunch on weekends, shop together, chat online, nearly every day. Her son's rebellious phase wasn't over yet, but Aiko's own parents were old-fashioned. They clung to outdated ideas like, you just have to tough it out, and endurance is a virtue. They weren't of any help at all. Naturally, Aiko came to lean even more on B, the only person who genuinely empathized and offered encouragement without judgment. The comfort she felt around her made it easier to rely on her. And then one day, B messaged Aiko to invite her out for lunch. Usually they'd meet at some nearby cheap family restaurant, but this time B suggested something different. Do you want to try going somewhere a little farther today? Aiko thought it might be nice for a change and agreed without any second thoughts. They took B's car to the restaurant. After lunch, while they were sharing dessert, B casually asked, "Do you ever feel like it's really hard doing everything alone?" "Well, of course," Aiko replied without any hesitation. Then B continued, "Do you have anything to believe in?" Aiko didn't quite understand what she meant. "Well, not really, I guess not," she answered. "Well, with the way the world is today, that makes sense." They moved on to small talk and eventually left the restaurant. When they got in the car, B didn't drive in the direction of Aiko's house. "Hey, isn't this the wrong way? Are we going shopping or something?" "Oh, it's just a little detour. There's somewhere I want to go," B said, almost nonchalantly. About 10 minutes later, they turned a corner, and that's when Aiko started to feel a knot in her stomach. Wait, this area looks familiar. It hit her. They were near a known facility belonging to one of Japan's most powerful cults. And just as they passed through the large iron gates, B said, "Aiko, I think the reason you're struggling so much in life is because you don't have any faith. You need something to believe in. I've been listening to your problems for years now, but I'm at my limit. I can't help you anymore on my own. That's why I think it's time for you to join and let Sama help you find peace." In that moment, Aiko realized exactly what had happened. She'd been set up. They'd found someone like her, isolated, vulnerable, in pain, and slowly gained her trust, made her feel safe, like she had found someone who understood her. and when her guard was down, they brought her here right to the gates of the cult itself. Later, Aiko would say, I think B believed that if she got me inside the grounds, it'd be easier to persuade me. Like once I was physically there, I'd have no choice but to go along with it. Then B said, Come on, I'll show you around, it's this way. The moment Aiko stepped out of the car, she bolted. She waited for the perfect opening and then took off running. Luckily, her family home was close by, only a few streets away, and she ran as fast as she could without ever looking back. After that day, Aiko erased every trace of B from her life. Phone numbers, chat history, everything. She never contacted her again. And to this day, she hasn't heard from her either. Time passed. Her son eventually outgrew his rebellious phase. They began to rebuild their relationship. One day, Aiko shared this story with him as something of a cautionary tale. Her son listened and said, If you'd have gone through with it, if you'd actually joined, maybe you wouldn't have come back. And I'm really glad you did. And I'm sorry for everything I put you through back then. Now they've built a much stronger, trusting bond as mother and son. What happened to Aiko is not just a scary personal experience, it's a chilling example of how cults prey on the most vulnerable in society. They don't always come with robed leaders or grand ceremonies. Sometimes they look like a kind smile, a patient listener, a friend who always seems to be there when no one else is. Loneliness, grief, abuse, these are not just personal struggles, they're openings, cracks in a person's life that can be quietly, systematically exploited. The danger is real, and it's not always in some faraway compound. It might be sitting across from you at lunch. Hi, Jay here. I know you must be curious about the cult mentioned, so based on the details in the story, I'm gonna guess, but I think I might be right. I believe the cult in question may have been Stalker. This suspicion is based on several key elements. The cult is described as well known and powerful in Japan, with its own facility, and that kind of chimes with Stalker. They operate community centers nationwide. The method of gradual emotional grooming through, this trusted friend, and the suggestion that a personal hardship is due to some sort of lack of belief, that kind of matches reports and allegations surrounding their outreach tactics, particularly, by the way, through PTA or community volunteer roles. And one of the phrases, "Do you have anything you believed in?" followed by a sudden detour to a religious facility, that just echoes recruitment stories that have been documented by former members and critics of the group. While Soka Gakkai presents itself as a mainstream lay Buddhist movement, its aggressive recruitment practices, its communities and pressure tactics have earned it a cult-like reputation in certain circles, especially those who've gone on to leave their organization. So, if you or someone you know is struggling, be mindful of who you open up to. True support never really demands blind faith. And no one, no matter how gentle their voice or understanding their words are, has the right to manipulate your pain for belief. This all started because I found myself in a situation where I really needed to turn to the help of the gods. I'll spare you the details of my personal situation, but as you might be able to guess, if you have to look for divine intervention, things must be dire, right? After that, I began to take things more seriously. I visited the sacred sites of Ise, Izumo, and Hyuga to make formal prayers and offerings, but then it struck me, it wouldn't make sense to pay respects to those distant deities while completely ignoring the guardian god of my own hometown. So I started visiting the small, time-worn shrine near my house. It's an old, quiet place tucked into a grove, the kind of shrine you'd pass by 100 times without noticing, until you suddenly need it. Now, I work at a hospital where strange things supposedly happen. Patients passing away unexpectedly, eerie sounds at nights, people whisper about occasional hauntings, but me? I've never seen a ghost in my life, as I'm spiritually insensitive as they come. Still, I make a point to believe, to trust that something might be listening. And so for the past few years, I've kept up this habit. Every other week, without fail, I stop by that shrine to offer a quiet prayer. Last summer, around Obon season, something unusual happened. It was a Saturday, one of those half days at work where I clock out by noon. I boarded the subway home like always, letting my mind drift as the train swayed along the tracks. Today's a shrine day, I thought, but I don't have enough coins to make offerings at all the stations. Maybe I'll buy a drink from the vending machine and break a bill. That was the plan, but right as I was thinking that, an odd image popped in my mind, completely out of nowhere. I saw a little boy, a stranger, asking me for the drink that I was about to buy. Just standing there, looking up at me with hopeful eyes. And in my head, without hesitation, I smiled and replied, "Sure, go ahead. I only bought it to break the bill anyway. You can have it." He looked so happy in that little mental scene, radiant almost. It was so weird. It was kind of like a dream, but it wasn't, if that makes any sense. It was more than a thought. I didn't think much of it though. I tend to daydream, especially during my commute. I often imagine little what-if scenarios when I've got time to kill. This one just happened to be a little more vivid than usual. Eventually I reached my stop. I stepped off the train and walked over to a vending machine near the ticket gates. I fed in a bill, scanned the buttons, and pressed for 1 can of afternoon tea. You know, that canned milk tea that's always a safe bet. When I heard the familiar clunk of the can dropping and the ka-ching of the coins returning, I reached down to collect my change first, like I always do. And then I reached into the drink's retrieval slot, and there was nothing. The can was gone. Confused, I checked the slot again. I even reached in and groped around towards the back in case it had gotten stuck somewhere, but still nothing. I looked around, but the platform was deserted. The only other person nearby was a station attendant far off behind the window at a ticket gate. Now, if someone had snatched it while I was collecting my change, they'd have to be standing right next to me. There's no way that I wouldn't have noticed that. Besides, I clearly heard the can full, and the change came back was exactly the amount I should have received after purchasing the drink. So where did it go? A weird thought crept into my mind. Did that imagined boy actually take it, like it was some kind of premonition? I immediately shook it off. Come on, even though it's so Bond season, this isn't a ghost story, surely, is it? Still, it was hard to ignore how bizarre it all felt. Things just don't vanish into thin air. That's not how reality works. But it's not like I was desperate for the tea. Honestly, I was a little thirsty, but the whole point was to break the bill for the coins, and I had already done that, so I brushed it off with a shrug. No big deal, whatever. I slid the coins into my wallet and headed to the shrine. Just like always, I offered my prayers with the same quiet sincerity I had every other visit. Afterwards, I stopped by my usual ramen shop for lunch before heading home. That day unfolded exactly like all the others, except of course for the strange disappearance of the afternoon tea from that spooky vending machine. Funny enough, that made the ramen shop's small gestures feel even warmer than usual. Let me give you an example. The old man behind the counter, he always tops off my water without asking, but for some reason, it meant more that day. "You need more water?" he said with a smile, already reaching for the pitcher. I nodded, and for the first time in a while, I felt really grateful. It was just a simple act of kindness, but it landed a little deeper than usual. Maybe I was more reflective that day. Maybe something about giving away a drink I never got softened me a bit. Just a quiet summer afternoon tinged with something unexplainable. Oh, and this might be a coincidence, but after that day, I started noticing small strokes of luck. Little things, nothing grand, just enough to feel like the universe was quietly nudging me forward. I like to think, maybe that little boy, real or not, left me a thank you. Maybe. In horror folklore, doppelgangers and mimics occupy a unique and deeply unsettling space. They aren't your typical ghosts or monsters. They don't chase or slash or scream, they imitate. A doppelganger, German for double walker, is said to be a supernatural double of a living person. Sometimes it's seen as a harbinger of death. Other times it's an omen, but in many modern Japanese tales it's something worse. It's you, seen doing things you never did, saying things you never said, appearing in places you've never been. And the people who see it, well, they're certain it's you. Every detail matches, the clothes, the voice. But it wasn't, and there's no explaining it. Sometimes, that's what makes it so terrifying. Here's a story I found. This happened when I was in the 6th grade. Back then I had this best friend. She was the kind of friend that I just absolutely adored. The kind where just being around her made my day better. We'd made plans to hang out after school on Saturday. And if you grew up in Japan and went to school in the early 2000s, you know Saturdays back then meant school ended at noon. No school on Saturday nowadays though. Lucky kids. So before we left the gates, I told her, "Do you want to come to my house at 1 o'clock?" And we both went our separate ways. I got back first. I made myself a simple lunch and ate alone. Afterwards, I flopped down in front of the TV, letting it wash over me. I must have fallen asleep without realizing it. What woke me up was a knock at the door. Startled, I got up and opened the front door to find my friend standing there. "Oh, sorry, I must have dozed off. Come on in." She smiled and stepped inside like normal, but then she looked at me and said, "Didn't you come to my house just now?" I blinked. "Eh? What do you mean?" She went on. "Well, just a little while ago you came to my house. You were standing out front calling my name, weren't you?" But I hadn't moved from the living room. I'd been asleep the whole time, and besides, I didn't know where her house was. I had been there once, but I wouldn't be able to get there by myself again. But she was insistent. She said she saw me, my bike, my clothes, even my voice, calling out to her in front of her house. She looked out the window and saw me there, clear as day. "Hang on," she called from the 2nd floor. "I'll be right there." And by the time she opened the front door, I was gone. Not a trace. Her mother saw me, or whatever it was, too. Even now, 6 years later, she still says the same thing. That was definitely you. There's no doubt in my mind. I think about it sometimes. It wasn't scary, not in the usual sense. But it was strange, unexplainable, a little too real. Like the world had glitched for a moment, and something else wore my skin for a second. And even now, all these years later, I still don't know what to make of it. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Or maybe, just maybe, something else wanted to be me for a little while. Let me know in the comments, what would you do if someone swore they saw you in a place you'd never been? Have you ever heard of Angel Summer? It's one of those old Japanese classroom games, sort of like Kokuri-san, the Japanese version of an Ouija board. If you're interested in Kokuri-san, I made a video, and I will put it in the description. But Angel Summer, this one feels a little more innocent, almost childish. Maybe that's what makes it so dangerous. You only need a piece of paper, 2 people, and a pencil. On the paper write out the 50 hiragana symbols in a grid, a, I, U, E, O, and so on. In a corner, add yes and no in Japanese, hai and ie. Then, 2 people sit facing each other, each holding one end of a pencil, lightly with both index fingers. Kind of like a strange game of thumb war. The rest of the group watches and asks questions. The spirit, or angel-sama, is supposed to answer by guiding the pencil to different letters, or to say yes and no. They say that the spirit is gentle and kind, but sometimes something else comes through, and if you're going to play, there's one rule you must never forget. You can't let go of the pencil until the game is properly closed, no matter what happens. Here's a story I found. Back when I was in middle school, Angel-sama was the talk of the school. Like any trend, it started out harmless. Kids giggling over who liked who, asking silly questions about love or pop quizzes. My friends and I were hooked. During each break, 3 or 4 of us would sneak off and play. One day it was just me and my best friend, A, holding the pencil, and with a couple other friends watching and asking questions. At first it was the usual stuff. Is there someone here who likes someone in the group? Will we pass the next math test? And then one of my friends, maybe a bit too bold, asked something different. Are you the same Angel-sama that appeared to D and F's group the other day? The pencil slowly dragged itself to hi, yes. We then all looked at each other. Not scared exactly, but more like confused. And then, she followed up, her voice a little hesitant. Are you a bad Angel-sama? The pencil slid to yeah, no. And we all breathed a sigh of relief. I remember thinking my arms were starting to ache. I wanted the session to be over soon. A yes to that question would have meant trouble. And then, another friend jumped in with one last question. Are you a good Angel-sama? The pencil moved again. Yeah, no. And in that moment, it felt like all the warmth drained from the room. I went cold all over. My heart dropped. Then, A screamed. She let go of the pencil in a panic, and I followed immediately after shouting, You can't drop it like that. We were supposed to close the session properly. There's a ritual. You're not supposed to just let go. Shaken, we all tried to laugh it off. We made dumb jokes, forcing loud laughter like we were trying to drive away the fear with noise. After a while, A stood up abruptly and said, I'm going to get some water. She said it so calmly, almost too calmly. It was jarring how quickly she switched from laughing to dead serious. Something in her tone just didn't seem to sit right. Still, we just nodded and went back to our chatter. But 10 minutes passed, then 15. Hey, isn't A taking kind of a long time? Someone asked. The water fountain was right outside the classroom. It should have taken less than 3 minutes for her to get a drink and come back. Maybe she went to the bathroom, my friend said, but none of us really believed that. The mood had shifted. We stepped outside to check, and there she was, bent over the fountain, lips pressed against the metal spout, completely still. At first we relaxed. Oh, she's still drinking, I said, relieved. But as I approached and looked at her face, that relief turned to pure, bone-deep fear. She was smiling, a huge, peaceful smile, like she'd never tasted anything better in her life, and her eyes, they were rolled completely back, nothing but white. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I grabbed her shoulder and shouted, Hey! But she didn't answer. She just leaned further into the fountain, lips pressed against the stream, drinking like she'd never stop. 2 other friends rushed over to help, and together we tried to pull her away, but she was strong. Too strong. It was like she was being held there. We were crying, yelling her name, begging her to stop. Then suddenly, her body jerked and she shrieked, Oh, Mizu! Her voice didn't sound human. It echoed off the walls, shrill, and awful. And just like that, she let go. She collapsed to the ground, her eyes still white, her limbs limp. She blacked out for a few seconds, but when she came to, we asked what happened. She told us that she had suddenly felt unbearably thirsty, like she had to drink water. She said it tasted amazing, like nothing she'd ever had before. She kept drinking, even as her chest started to hurt, even as her throat burned. She wanted to stop, but she couldn't. She knew something was wrong. Her body wouldn't listen to her. She doesn't remember anything after that, not until we pulled her away. We never played Angel Summer again. Even now, just remembering that moment makes my heart race. When I write it all out, it might not seem all that terrifying, but when you've lived through something you can't explain, when you've looked a friend in the face and see someone or something else staring back, it sticks with you. And no matter how many years may pass, I'll never forget that smile. This is a true story from when I was a university student. I've made a few personal interpretations where things don't make sense, so if you notice something that feels off, I'd actually appreciate it if you point it out. I'm still trying to put the pieces together. You'll see. During summer breaks, I used to travel a lot. Not like backpacking across foreign countries for spiritual enlightenment or anything like that. More like hopping on random local trains and getting off at places I've never heard of. Grabbing some soba, soaking in a hot spring, buying a souvenir or two, then heading home. This was around the end of the 20th century, when the internet had only just started becoming a thing. Pagers were still considered to be high-tech gear, and smartphones didn't exist. You couldn't just look up stuff about where you were going. Most of the time I had zero plans. If I managed to find a net cafe to sleep in, then that was a good night. More often than not, I just crashed at stations and slept rough. Anyway, on one summer day, I was riding the last train on a local line somewhere in the Kanto region, and I got off one stop before the final destination. I was the only one who got off. Why? Simple, I liked the name of the station. That's literally it. Sure, the next stop was more well known and probably had more going on, but I was already prepared to sleep at the station that night, so it didn't really matter. In hindsight, this was a bad idea because this was the decision that kicked off one of the most terrifying nights of my life. The place was a remote, unmanned station in the middle of nowhere, but the building itself was surprisingly decent. Spending the night there didn't seem like it would be much of an issue. No houses anywhere nearby, no shops obviously, but there were vending machines and a fairly clean toilet. And to my surprise, I saw a wooden sign not far from the station. It advertised an open-air bath within walking distance. I'd already bathed earlier that evening near another station, but I had no reason not to go again. So I followed a narrow mountain trail that led away from the edge of what used to be a hot spring town. Eventually I found it, a tiny bathhouse tucked away in a grove of trees, just a small tub with a roof over it. I tossed some coins into the payment box and turned on my mini lantern and slipped into the warm water. The night air was quiet, and I was soaking there peacefully, until the wind suddenly turned cold. No, it wasn't a ghost or anything like that, just a chill in the air that makes you go, "Ah, crap, it's gonna rain." Sure enough, I got dressed quickly and started heading back down towards the station, and by the time I arrived, the first few drops had turned into a downpour. Talk about perfect timing. I even gave myself a little pat on the back for moving so quickly. Feeling pretty smug, I sat myself down on a bench inside the station, and I stretched out. It was dark inside, but light from the platform seeped in past the ticket gates, enough for me to see what I was doing. I pulled out my sleeping bag and crawled into it. I set my mini alarm clock to go off an hour before the first train. And just as I started to drift off, I noticed it. Something felt off. There was a strange smell. Not mine. Like an animal. musky. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and then I saw him. In the far corner of the station house, a man was sitting with his knees hugged against his chest. My heart leapt into my throat. I clenched my jaw and tried to force the panic back down. Outside, the rain pounded on the roof. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and this guy, he must have been sitting there the whole time, right? I'd made quite a bit of noise setting my stuff up, and he just sat there watching me, saying nothing. I stared at him. My pulse was racing. He was curled up in sort of a crouch, face buried against his knees, so I couldn't see his expression. He wore chinos and a collared shirt. Looked way more presentable than me. His hair was a bit messy, and he had a broad frame. But he didn't move. Not a twitch. Not even the sound of breathing. I hadn't been looking at him for more than a minute. But I was already starting to think, wait, is he dead? Hey, I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. I clapped my hands together. Loud, sharp, echoing. In the empty station. Nothing. Alright, time to take this test properly then. I grabbed the mini alarm clock I'd just set and changed the time to the current time. The alarm rang out. It was so loud, but still nothing. Right, that's it. He's dead. When I arrived, the lights in the station were on, and he definitely wasn't there. So he must have arrived and potentially died while I was at the bathhouse. But how? Was this an accident or a crime? I remembered there was a payphone outside the station. I figured I should probably call the police. But what if he was just asleep? I mean, unlikely, but still. I stomped my feet loudly as I approached him, got right up close, and leaned in to take a look at his face. Shouldn't have done that. Blood was dribbling from his mouth like drool. Okay, maybe he might still be alive. I touched his arm. It was cold, stiff. Rigor mortis appeared to have already set in. Yeah, he was definitely dead. I turned towards the door to head outside, hand on the handle, and then it hit me. If I call the cops, I'll be the one who found him, right? They'll question me, maybe even suspect me, and that sounded like a huge pain in the ass. I hesitated. I sat back down on the bench. I started packing up all my stuff, sleeping bag, alarm clock, everything. I tried to reconstruct my alibi from the moment I stepped off the train until now. I hadn't seen anyone except him. Though technically he saw me first. Still, maybe it was an accident. Maybe he just came in to get out of the rain, sat down and died. I mean, that's plausible, right? I turned my lantern back on and went to approach him again. Then I saw marks on his neck, like something had been wrapped around it. It wasn't natural. This was murder. I didn't want any part of this. I told myself, if I could think of a good way to prove my innocence, then I'd call the police. But right then my brain was spinning. I wasn't thinking straight. If I got caught up in this, I'd miss work, and honestly that was the bigger concern in my mind at the time. As I spiraled in thought, a little dark voice inside me whispered, "Just leave." This guy had nothing to do with me. I didn't know him. I wasn't involved. I was innocent. That sounded really appealing. I decided I'd walk to the next train station, the one I was originally heading towards, and I'd get there by the morning. But just as I put my hand on the door again, thunder cracked. Alright, the rain. I sat back down. Maybe I should just wait out the night. If it clears by dawn, I'll slip away quietly. But then, the smell started to fill the room. The man's smell. That sickly, unmistakable scent of death. I couldn't take it anymore, so I decided to sit on the bench out on the platform instead. As I crossed through the gate, I spotted the small waiting room across the tracks. Perfect. I climbed the stairs to the opposite platform. The lights inside were off, but the bench had cushions, and it was more comfortable than I expected. If not for the dead guy, this would have been a great spot to sleep. And at some point, I must have nodded off. I slept surprisingly well. When I woke up, the sky was still dark, but it had that early dawn feel, and the rain had stopped. Stars glittered overhead, something you never really see in the sea. Panicking a little, I headed back across the bridge towards the main station. Just get out without looking at the body, I told myself. I passed through the gate and I couldn't resist looking in the direction I saw him in last, but he was gone. I froze. My body instinctively dropped into some kind of martial arts stance, like a praying mantis. Did he get up? Was he alive this whole time? Total panic. No idea what to do. I screamed. And then I started singing. I don't know why, but it was something random and something stupid. I don't even remember what song it was. When I finally stopped, I slumped onto the bench again. My breathing slowed. My mind began to clear. I went over to where he had been sitting. And there was a stain there. Maybe blood, maybe drool, maybe something else. It was dark. I couldn't say for sure. And then I noticed a smell that hadn't registered the night before. Cigarette smoke. Fresh, not old and stale. Fresh. I checked the ashtray. Murky water and a bunch of soggy butts. It was hard to tell anything from that. I sat down again, trying to make sense of it. Maybe the man was alive. Maybe he woke up, smoked a cigarette, and left. That'd be the best case scenario, but no. I'm pretty sure he was dead. I touched him. He was ice cold and stiff. So, then what happened? Someone must have put his body there. Then when I was asleep in the other waiting room, they came back and took it? And that someone had been smoking? Well, that theory scared the hell out of me. If I'd just stayed in the station building, I would have run into him. A murderer? Yakuza? Some kind of crazy drifter, foreign mafia? Who knows who the culprit might have been? If I'd have tried walking to the next station, maybe they would have followed me. Maybe I was safer here without even realizing it. Somehow by total accident, I had chosen the safest possible place to hide. I waited until the first train arrived. About half an hour before it came, an old lady shuffled into the station. I don't think I'd ever been so relieved to see another person in my life. I never reported what happened. I didn't even know how to explain it. Back home I searched Yahoo News every day for weeks, but nothing came up. No reports, no missing persons, nothing. Over 10 years have now passed since then, and the memory has faded a bit, but sometimes when I'm camping or sleeping outdoors, it comes back. Sometimes I dream about it. A thunderous night at the rural station. Me sleeping. The man reappearing in the waiting room. Me screaming and running away. Sometimes I think, if I'd reported it right away, the police might have caught something on the cameras. It could have been solved, but I don't know. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was all a dream. Let's go with that. Yeah? This is a story I heard at a relative's house through a friend. My friend's uncle had a house deep in the mountains of our prefecture. Back when we were students, my friend and I, both of us training in martial arts, decided to spend a week there under the pretense of one final training camp. We brought along mitts and hand wraps and stayed at his uncle's place for about a week. My friend's uncle had quite a large house with lots of rooms, so any concerns about us being a burden turned out to be unnecessary. It ended up being a very comfortable week. Our meals were mostly egg whites and protein powders, so we really didn't cause them trouble in that department either. By the time we hit the halfway mark of our stay, we'd gotten pretty friendly with the uncle and his cousin, and they started opening up to us more. It was on the 5th day after dinner that I casually asked, "Hey, I noticed if you go a bit further out from here, you see posters on the local train line advertising festivals and hiking trails, all sorts of stuff. Why don't you have anything like that around here?" His cousin grinned. The mountains here missed out the whole hiking boom back in the Showa era. But more than that, stuff shows up here, so it's not exactly suitable for tourists. Ghosts? I asked. Yeah, probably ghosts too, he said, but more like yokai. I was definitely intrigued, but I didn't want to come off like a some obsessed supernatural geek, so I played it cool. Oh yeah? Yeah, I'll show you tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow? Was he actually going to take me to where this yokai appeared? I was hyped. I could barely sleep. The next day I spent the whole time jumpy and distracted, doing sit-ups, sparring with my friend, munching on wild greens, waiting for his cousin to come over and call us. It was around dusk when he finally spoke up. About that yokai from yesterday. We're ready now. So come with me. What, now? It felt a little late to be heading up the mountain. But instead of the woods, he led me to one of the houses, tatami rooms. Inside, his uncle was sitting there cross-legged in the middle, with a single book laid out before him. Sit, he said. I took a seat on one of the cushions they'd set out, and his uncle looked at me, nostrils flaring. So you're curious about why this mountain hasn't been turned into a tourist site, and whether yokai have something to do with it. Sure, I was curious, but the cousin brought it up, not me. Look, it's not exactly a yokai. It's not quite a god either. It's something in between, the uncle continued. I've told your friend here about it before. Now turn to the marked page in that book. The book's cover read something like the local history of the village. It was musty and old, like something that could summon ghosts just by touching it. Definitely not the type of book you'd find in the public library. The page he pointed at was a small entry entitled something like The Gratitude Patrol. I skipped through it. Apparently, at the end of World War II, a group of young men refused to surrender. They called for a final battle on the homeland, armed themselves, and holed up in the mountain. Eventually, the ringleaders ended up committing seppuku. It sounded like a very messy episode, even drawing responses from youths in nearby cities known for their big festivals. So their ghosts show up now? I asked. His cousin cut in. Now I told you, not ghosts. Yokai. Check this one out too, the uncle said. He pulled out another old booklet, this one even more tattered, and handed it to me. It looked like a handmade journal. The page was handwritten, using a mix of old kanji and kana that made it hard to read. But here's the gist of what it said. The aforementioned youths, realizing the situation, returned home honorably before dawn. These young men, said to carry the future of our nation, showed great wisdom. In contrast, the old ringleaders, all over 40 and expected to know better, chose seppuku and died disgracefully. The strange thing is, the condition of their bodies. Their corpses were brought down this morning. Not cut with blades, but torn open. It was as if they had eaten grenades and had their stomachs exploded from the inside. The stench was already unbearable, so I didn't inspect them for long, but even I could tell this wasn't seppuku. The younger ones said little, only that the elders had performed seppuku during the night, unseen by anyone. Most likely, it was the monkey god. What's the monkey god? I asked. The uncle exhaled sharply through his nose, clearly pleased. It's a guardian deity of this region. There's a little shrine at the entrance of the village. You saw it, right? That's where it's enshrined. This mountain isn't what you'd call a sacred peak or anything, but it's being protected by the monkey god for generations. That's why we can't just let hikers and tourists wander in here. You never know what the god might do. The story goes that the monkey god attacked the ringleaders in the dead of night and tore open their guts because they manipulated the youth and led them astray. And now, if some outsider comes in with no respect for the mountain and its customs, they might end up facing the same fate. That's why they've deliberately chosen not to promote the area for tourism. After that, we swapped some ghost stories about the main house, had a few drinks, and went off to bed. The next day I asked my friend about what we'd heard. That handwritten booklet? It's a diary from our great-uncle, or great-great-uncle. When I visited with other relatives from the main house, we read that same passage. Back during the hiking boom, some railway company folks tried to talk them into developing the area, but the elders turned them down, citing the mountain's god At first I thought it was just some convenient excuse to avoid being left behind by modern tourism, but now I know. I think they were deadly serious. Apparently, his uncle is a bit of a horror nut and UFO enthusiast, and he always tells this story when someone new comes to visit. My friend first heard it during some kind of summer gathering with the main family. Hi, Jay here. Just like to go into a little bit more about the monkey god. The Sarugami-sama, monkey god, is a lesser-known figure in Japan's vast pantheon of yokai and kami. In folklore, monkeys often straddle the line between sacred and dangerous. They're seen as protectors in mountain regions, particularly where the boundaries between the natural world and the spiritual world blur. In certain Shinto practices, monkeys serve as messengers for the mountain gods, and in rare cases they are the gods. Wild, cunning, and temperamental. When angered, they're said to attack those who defile sacred lands. In this story, the monkey god serves as a brutal enforcer of nature's justice. Its wrath is directed not at foreign invaders or abstract evil, but just at betrayers, those who lead the young astray, who exploit faith or community. It's not just some misunderstood forest spirit, it's a protector that kills when necessary, striking with shocking violence to preserve balance. And what makes the story chilling isn't just the cryptid or yokai itself, but it's the logic behind the village's silence. By not promoting tourism, they're protecting both outsiders and themselves. They're guarding the mountain, yes, but they're also guarding the god from modern disrespect. And when faith becomes fear, when traditions aren't just honored but weaponized, who's really in control? Whether you believe in yokai or not, there's a lesson here. Some places aren't just quiet because they're forgotten. Sometimes they're quiet on purpose.